Can I be heard? Just give me a 1. And then, okay. Now, funny point, Kevin. So your rebuttal to Daniel is that Jesus is worshipped by all nations. Daniel is just worshipped by these guys. Ladies and gentlemen, in Daniel, when Daniel was worshipped, Daniel was a prophet of a monotheistic God, ladies and gentlemen. This wasn't some hillbilly. He was preaching monotheism. He was a Jewish prophet. He didn't reject their worship, and God himself didn't condemn it. Ladies and gentlemen, if some wrong people started worshiping a prophet, and the prophet doesn't say anything about it, and God himself, Yahweh, who condemns polytheism, says sometimes you should be killed for it, and he doesn't condemn it, what more do you need? As you said, Kabane, what stronger evidence do you need for him being a deity? He was worshipped, and he didn't reject it. What about Isaiah 7? No, you're wrong. Everybody go read Isaiah 7. The context is clear. This is a prophecy about the one who will be born to the virgin. It comes right after it. What about the Jews? The Jews changed their belief after Christianity. That is false. They didn't change their belief. Rather, what happened is that Christians came along and changed the Old Testament belief to fit your belief. And we can find that throughout the New Testament. Why were people confused about a man-God? Why were people confused about a God-man? Why were they so ignorant about this, like they never heard about it? Because it never was taught in the Old Testament. The Jews didn't change their belief at all. The Jews don't believe the wisdom of God is some trinity, and that's a fact. So that's your wisdom of God, and my time is going to be up in like 10 seconds, so I'm off.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Zaatari. Now, again, you say, oh, well, God was silent about the worship of Daniel in Daniel 2. There is a difference between silence and encouraging the worship. If God had encouraged the worship of the prophet Daniel, we would have had a problem. I see in Daniel chapter 7, God calls all nations before the throne of the Son of Man and says, worship him. And note that the Son of Man is seated on the right hand of Yahweh. Remember earlier I pointed out that that means that the Son of Man shares in Yahweh's divine authority. You did not refute that point. You automatically lose that point. As for Isaiah chapter 7, I say again, oh, look at the context. It's referring to the virgin, one born of the virgin. I agree, but biblical prophecy is complex. Scholars recognize that there are two references, which often change places in there. Isaiah 7:14, that's referring to the one born of the virgin, but you also see in Isaiah chapter 8 that there is one who also fulfills that prophecy because the prophecy is given to people in that time. It has a short-term fulfillment, and that refers to the short-term fulfillment, and it has a long-term fulfillment. You have to understand the complex nature of biblical prophecy. You are simply using your simplistic thinking. Now, as for the Jews changing their belief systems, they did change their belief systems. My citation was not from Christian manuscripts of the Old Testament. No, it was from the pre-Christian manuscripts of the Aramaic Targums, which were passed through not Christian hands, but Jewish hands. An example is in Genesis chapter 19, where there are two Yahwehs, where Yahweh rains fire down from Yahweh. The Yahweh on earth rains fire down from the Yahweh in heaven. The Jews in the Aramaic Targum, they call the Yahweh on earth the Word of Yahweh. In other words, there are two persons there, and one person is communicating with the other person. This is a Jewish doctrine. This is a Jewish belief. And it is taught clearly in the pre-Christian Jewish Aramaic Targums. You have not even addressed the Aramaic Targums. You didn't address my point about Jesus appropriating the exact Old Testament language used for I am. When you're walking on the water, don't be afraid, I am. And again, you don't address my point about you being hypocritical about showing a single verse, so I win that point. You've never addressed my point about al-Haq and how Jesus claims to be the truth, whereas in the Quran, only Allah is the truth. So if Jesus is a Muslim, then he's God.
Okay, yeah, it's complex. Isaiah 7 is not complex. You see, this is a typical Trinitarian for you. When you bring them something so clear, which debunks them, they come and say, oh, this is complex. This is complex. Isaiah is complex. No, it isn't. Everybody go read Isaiah 7, the prophecy about the Messiah. It's not complex at all. Your future Messiah, your God, according to this prophecy, doesn't know right from wrong. And that's a fact. Secondly, Daniel was a prophet of God. Okay? He was a prophet of God. As I said, he wasn't some hillbilly. So why in the world would God stay silent and do nothing? The very same God who condemns polytheism, who condemns prophets, if they go and do something wrong, they will be put to death. Now Daniel is worshipped, and God doesn't do, he goes missing all of a sudden. Where are you, God? Well, what's up? This guy's being worshipped. I thought polytheism was wrong. Silence. Nothing on that case. Now you bring up the Jewish Targums, etc., etc. Again, this is a Jewish topic. Jews do not believe the wisdom of God is God. And I asked you a question. If this belief was in the Old Testament, if Jews believed in a separate or in separate persons within the Godhood, God is made up of three, etc., etc., then why in the world would they be so shocked about a God-man? Why were they so ignorant about it? Why is it like something new for them? 2,000 years went by, and now you Christians happily come to the scene, and we're supposed to believe it? Please, who are you trying to kid? And I'm not being hypocritical at all. You still need to bring the verse. You still need to bring the verse. The verse in Thomas, doubting Thomas, is completely different to a verse where he says, I am Yahweh. My time is up.
Okay, so let's go back to this Daniel issue real quick, because you just ignored my last point. There is a difference between being silent about false worship and encouraging false worship. You can see in Daniel chapter 7, God the Father, Yahweh, is encouraging the worship of the Son of Man. Does God the Father encourage the worship of one who is not to be worshipped? No, he never would. Would he be silent on it? Apparently he is, but he would never encourage it. Okay, now, as for Isaiah 7, you just make fun of me, say, oh, it's complex. You know how I know it's complex? Because I have read secular, non-Christian, and Christian biblical scholarship who both say that there are two references in Isaiah chapter 7. I have had atheists come to me and say, oh, look, in Isaiah chapter 8, Isaiah 7 is fulfilled. But look at Isaiah 7, two reference within one context. Okay, again, you ignore my point about Jesus being the truth. The Quran says that there is one person who is to be called the truth. That is God alone, Allah alone. Jesus claims to be the truth. You ignore it again and again. You continue to ignore it. You have ignored all of my objections about the Quran, proving that Jesus is God, how Jesus claims titles given to God in the Quran. You've ignored my objection about Jesus appropriating the exact Greek words for Greek language for God used in the prophet Isaiah. You just ignore, and ignore. And you say, okay, well, why are the Jews surprised that, why don't the Jews understand? Because though they believed in multiple persons in one God, they did not believe that the Messiah was one of these persons. That's why they're confused. And you say, oh, well, don't Jews believe there's one person in one God? Modern Jews do. Look at the Aramaic Targums. Look at the Aramaic Targums. There is clearly a multi-personal belief in the Aramaic Targums. You have not addressed this point. And say, I'm not being hypocritical at all. You haven't shown the single verse, but that you said we can't just look at a single verse. What is it? Do I have to show you a single verse, or are we not allowed to just look at a single verse? You have to answer that question. You're just being hypocritical, Ken. You have not addressed the vast majority of my points here. Look at the Old Testament. Look at the scholar I quoted who said that wisdom claims titles that are claimed by God alone. It is clear wisdom is God. Thank you.
Okay, there's a big difference when someone just comes up and says, I am Yahweh. There is no debate. It's over. And everybody knows that. It's a completely different situation. And you're trying to run away with it now. You're trying to run away from it and bring up this hypocritical point because you can't even bring the verse. So bring the verse. Because then when you bring that verse, the context, everything you're saying could revolve around that. That lays the foundation. But he never even said it. You don't even have that context to back you up. And when you compare doubting Thomas, who gives him titles which are given to other men which aren't even explicit, then you have no case. And again, okay, God is silent. God is silent on Daniel being worshipped. So if he doesn't say anything against it, I guess there was nothing wrong with it.